We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Dalet Amud Beis Meseches Shevuos. This is Shevuos Daf 14b. On the previous Amud, the Mishnah mentioned the procedure and the ceremony for adding on to the Azorah of the Beis HaMikdash, and the Mishnah mentioned two todos, and the Mishnah now continues, Hapnimis, the inner one, Ne'echeles, is eaten, V'hachitzona nisrefes, and the outer one is burned. Rashi explains, Pnimis v'chitzona mefarish b'Gemara. The Gemara will explain what we mean by the inner and the outer one, and v'ne'echeles v'nisrefes nami mefarish b'Gemara. What we mean by eaten and burned will also be explained in the Gemara. And the Mishnah continues, V'chol shelo nasis b'chol elu. If you didn't add on to the Azorah using all of the procedure that was mentioned above in the previous Amud, hanichnas l'sham ein chayav oleh. So then that part of the Azorah that was added onto, if it wasn't added onto in the proper fashion, it's not considered part of the Mikdash. And if somebody were to enter there and they were tameh, they would actually not be liable. And the Mishnah continues, Nitma ba'azara. Let's say a person actually became tameh in the Azara. And Rashi says, Nitma ba'azara, v'yoda shenitma. The person became tameh in the Azara, and he knew that it became tameh. V'nelma mimenu tuma. And then there was a lapse of awareness of the tuma. V'zochar es ha-mikdash. And he remembered that it was the mikdash. Or nelam heimenu mikdash v'zochar ha-tuma. Or again, let's say there was a lapse of awareness that this was the mikdash, and then he remembered that he knew about the tuma. Nelam mimenu zeh v'zeh. Or let's say there was a lapse of awareness of both. V'hishtachave. And then he bowed when he was there, or he stayed there, he delayed there the amount of time that it would take to bow. Obolo ba'aruch, or let's say he left and he took a longer route. So in all of these cases, chayiv, he's going to be liable. But if he takes the shortest route and he leaves immediately, so pater, then he's going to be exempt from bringing the carbon ola v'yored. And Rashi explains, Nitma ba'azara, he becomes tameh in the Azara itself. Again, v'yada shenitma, and he knows that he became tameh. And then hishtachav, and then he bows behelam zeb when there was that lapse of awareness. O shasha kidei hishtachav, or let's say he just stayed there the amount of time it would take to bow. B'gemar mefarish shiura, the Gemara will explain how long that is. O shebolo ba'arucha means sheyatzalo derech arucha, he left and he took a longer route out. Sheyesh ketzara hemenu lotzes, there was a shorter route that he could have taken. So chayiv, he's going to be liable. Even if initially he did not delay, in that case again where he exited with the long route, all of these amounts of time is halach l'moshe misinai b'misha nitma b'soch azar, specifically with regards to somebody who became tameh in the azar itself, and b'ksara pater. But if he took the shortest route out, then he's exempt. As long as he didn't bow, he didn't delay at all, he took the shortest route out, so then again he is pater. And the Mishnah continues, Zuhi mitzvah saseh shebemikdash. This is a mitzvah saseh, a positive commandment in the Beis HaMikdash, she'ein chayavin oleh, that they are not liable for. And Rashi explains, Zuhi means to say, Tuma she'ira lo b'soch azara. Let's say you have this case where the person became tameh inside the azara of the Beis HaMikdash, in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. Zuhi mitzvah saseh shebemikdash. There's a mitzvah saseh here in the Mikdash. The yesh kan mitzvah saseh, because there is a mitzvah saseh involved when somebody becomes tameh in the azara. It says v'yishalchu min hamachane v'chol tameh lenefesh. It says they have to be sent out. So that's a mitzvah saseh. But she'ein chayavin ala bezdin par behora v'lo koin mashiach. Normally, let's say the Bezdin, for example, were to issue an erroneous ruling, a mistaken ruling, so there has to be a special carbon that is brought. That does not apply if there's a ruling, a mistaken ruling in this, with regards to this particular issue of leaving the Azara when one becomes Tameh in the Azara, and again, that will be explained in the Gemara. And the Mishnah continues, Ve'ezu hi mitzvah saseh shebenida shechayavin oleh. Now, what is the mitzvah saseh, the positive commandment with reference to a nida, where there is a chiyav in terms of the bezdin by the par behora and also the kohen mashiach, also the kohen gadol? That would be in the following scenario: Hayemeshamish im hatahora. Let's say a person is having relations with a woman and she is pure; she's not a nida. V'yamar lo, and then she says to him in the middle, nitmesi, that I became tummy. This is similar; it's analogous to the case we just had, where the person is in the Azara and he's pure and he becomes tameh. And so the same idea over here, she tells him in the middle that I became tameh, upirish miyad, and then immediately he separates. He's not supposed to do that. So chayiv, so in that case he's actually liable, because if he leaves in that fashion, it's as pleasurable to him as when he entered in, and so therefore he's not supposed to do that. And in this particular case, there actually would be a liability again in terms of the Bezin Par Behora and Kohen Mashiach. And Rashi explains, Ve'ezuhi mitzvahs aseh shebenida aidi detana behorios. The reason why the Mishnah is discussing this is because in Horios it says, Ein chayovin al aseh shebemikdash, aval chayovin al aseh shebenida. It makes this contrast. It says there's no chayav and an aseh in the mikdash, as the Mishnah here just explained, but there is liability by the aseh by nida. So because it says that contrast over there in Horios, katani hacha ezuhi mitzvahs aseh shebemikdash ve'ezuhi shebenida. We do the same thing over here. What's the mitzvahs aseh by the mikdash, and what's the one by nida? And again, by nida it's as follows: if he's having relations with a pure woman, hainu dumya da aseh shebemikdash. This is a case that's similar to the case by mikdash. She'iru lo hatoma mishabah beheter lidei knisa. He entered the mikdash and he was allowed to be there. He wasn't tamei at that time. Then he became tamei. That's the same thing over here in the act of relations. V'yamar lo nitzmeisi achshav, and he says, right now I just became tamei. Uperish miyad bekushi ha'ever, and then while his limb was still hard, he separated. So chayiv, then he's liable. Rather, what he should do is yamod below disha ad sheyamas aver. He should wait until the aver softens, v'yifresh below kushi, and then separate when it's not hard. V'zeu aseh, that's a positive. V'gemara yolaflan, the Gemara will learn that out. And so again, in that situation, there is a liability. Let's say, for example, the Bezin would issue an erroneous ruling in that regard. And the Mishnah continues at the two dots. Rabbi Eliezer says, Hasheretz v'nelam mimenu. The pasuk says Hasheretz v'nelam. It sounds like the pasuk seems to be saying that the lapse of awareness was specifically with regards to the tumah, and that's what Rabbi Eliezer says. Al helam sheretz chayiv ve'eino chayiv al helam mikdash. A person is chayiv to bring the carbon olav yored only when there's a lapse of awareness in terms of the tumah, in terms of the sheretz, but not if there's a lapse of awareness in terms of the fact that this is the mikdash. Rabbi Akiva says v'nelam mimenu v'hu tamei. Rabbi Akiva says very similar. It says that there's a lapse of awareness on the tumah. Al helam tumah chayiv. If there's a lapse of awareness on the tumah, he's liable. Ve'eno chayiv al helam mikdash, but he's not chayiv on a lapse of awareness of the mikdash. Rabbi Yishmael says v'nelam shtei pa'amim. It says v'nelam twice, and that is l'chayiv al helam tumah v'al helam mikdash. Therefore, the person is liable both for the lapse of awareness of tumah and for the lapse of awareness of mikdash. And Rashi explains Hasheretz v'nelam o benivlas sheretz tamei v'nelam imenu. That's the full pasuk. Rabbi Akiva, he seems to be saying the same as Rabbi Eliezer, that it's only by a lapse of awareness of tumah. And so Rashi says B'gemar mefarish ma'ay beinayu. The Gemara will explain what the difference is between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Papa li Abaya. Rav Papa said to Abaya, Shtayim shein arba. Again, the Mishnah says that by Yedias HaTumah there are two primary cases, but there's a total of 4 cases because you have secondary cases as well. But the question is, those numbers don't work out. Shtayim shein sheish havin. It really should be 2, which are 6. And the reason for that is as follows. You have Yedios HaTumah tchila v'sof. First of all, you have knowledge of the Tumah in the beginning and the end. Again, a situation could be where the person knows he was Tameh, then he had a lapse of awareness about the Tumah, and then he knew about the Tumah. So that's 2 cases of Yediyah by Tumah tchila v'sof. And then you also have Yedios HaKodesh tchila v'sof. Let's say there was a lapse of awareness in terms of the item that he was eating, whether it was Kodesh or not, and you have knowledge in the beginning and the end, and again, a lapse of awareness in the interim. And then you have Yedios Mikdash tchila v'sof. Then you also have a situation where he enters the Beis HaMikdash, he knew about the Beis HaMikdash, he had a lapse of awareness about the Beis HaMikdash, and then he realized he was in the Beis HaMikdash with Tumah, and so you have the Yediyah by Mikdash tchila v'sof. So you actually have 6 Yediyos. You have the Yediyah by Tumah in the beginning and the end, you have the Yediyah by Kodesh in the beginning of the end, and you have Yediyah by the Mikdash in the beginning of the end. So what do we mean that it's 2 which is 4? It really should be 2 which is 6. But the Gemara continues, but according to your reasoning, if this is a question, so it's actually not 2 which is 6, it's actually Tamnei Havyan. It's actually 2 which is 8. There are 8 scenarios of Yediyah. Taha'ika Tumah de Kodesh, V'Tumah de Mikdash, because really, when it comes to Yediyos HaTumah tchila v'sof, you have 2 scenarios of those. You have Yediyos HaTumah tchila v'sof when the person ate Kodesh, and you have Yediyos HaTumah tchila v'sof when the person entered the Beis HaMikdash. Again, tchila v'sof, you have tchila v'sof in both the Kodesh and Mikdash situations by Yediyos HaTumah. So you actually have a total of 8 Yediyos. You can have a situation where you had Yediyah of the Tumah in the beginning of the end by both Kodesh and Mikdash. That's a total of 4 Yediyos by Tumah. And then you have a situation of Yediyah of Mikdash in the beginning of the end, and Yediyah of Kodesh in the beginning and at the end, and so therefore again it should be a total of 8. And so the Gemara says to that, Holokasha, well that's not a question. Why it should be 8 is not a difficulty, because Shem Tuma Achasi, because Yediyah Satuma Tchila V'Sof, that's all counted as one. The fact that you could have a case of Yediyah Satuma Tchila V'Sof when it comes to Kodesh and when it comes to Mikdash, we don't count that twice. But still the Gemara says, Mikol Makom Sheshavia, nevertheless, don't we have a total of 6 cases of Yediyah? And again, the point over here is that by Yediyah Satuma specifically, by Karban Olav Yored, you bring a Karban Olav Yored when you have a situation of Yediyah Satuma, the halacha happens to be by Tumah that you need to have Yediyah in the beginning and Yediyah in the end, and you have to have a lapse of awareness in the interim. And it doesn't matter if that lapse of awareness had to do with Kodesh or Mikdash. Again, as we said, it doesn't matter if the Yediyah in the beginning is the Yediyah Sakodesh Tchila V'Sof, and then there was a lapse of awareness in the middle, etc. But the point is, you do have a total of 6 Yediyos if we count Yediyah Satuma as 2 and not as 4, as we just said. And so why is it that the Mishnah says Yediyah Satuma is Shtayim Shein Arba? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rapapa says, Li'olam tamne havyan. Really, you're right. Technically speaking, it really is 8. There's a total of 8 because you have Yediyah Satuma Tchila V'Sof by both Kodesh and Mikdash, and then you have Yediyah of Mikdash Tchila V'Sof and Yediyah of Kodesh Tchila V'Sof. However, we don't count it as 8 for the following reason. Our boy Kamaisa, all of the Yediyos that are Betchila, those first ones, those first Yediyos, the Lo Maison Le Lidei Karban, those are not the ones that bring the person to bring a Karban. You're only going to bring a Karban if you have a Yediyah at the end, because there has to be an awareness of the Avera. You have to have the Yediyah at the end. That brings the person to the Karban. And so therefore the Yediyos at the beginning, which are required, but they don't really bring the person to the Karban, so Lo Kachashiv, so we're not even counting those. And it's only Arba Basraisa, the Ma'ason Leili Day Karban Kachashiv. We're only counting the latter Yediyos that bring a person to a Karban. Those are the ones we're counting. So if you count it in that fashion, so now you have Yediyah at the end in terms of Yediyah Satuma, you have 2 scenarios of Yediyah at the end, because you have Yediyah Satuma at the end by Mikdash and by Kodesh. That's for Yediyah Satuma. And then you also have Yediyah Mikdash at the end, and Yediyah Kodesh at the end, and so therefore you have a total, again, of 4. That's what it means, 2, which is 4. We're only counting the later Yediyos. And the Gemara continues with another answer. V'ika di'amri, and there are those that say, Amar Rapapa says as follows, a different version of this answer. Li'olam tamni havin. Again, really, there's a total of 8 Yediyos. As we said, there's technically 8 Yediyos because you have Yediyas Hatoma Tchila V'Sof by both Mikdash and Kodesh, and then you have Yediyas Mikdash Tchila V'Sof and Yediyas Kodesh Tchila V'Sof. So it really is a total of 8. And in this version, V'arboy Kamaisa, so the first ones, the first Yediyos, the lesnuhu b'chol haTorah kula, those don't exist in other areas of the Torah, other areas where you're bringing karbanos for doing something by mistake. We don't care about the Yediyos Kamaisa, so those Kachashiv, those we're counting because those are unique to Tumah. The idea of having Yediyah at the beginning is unique to Tumah. Arboy Basraisa, but the 4 later Yediyos, the Isnuhu b'chol haTorah kula, those apply by all karbanos that you bring in the Torah, lo Kachashiv, so those are the ones that we're not counting, so it's just the reverse of the previous answer. And Rashi explains, our boy Basraisi, the 4 later Yedios, meaning Yedios Shevasof, the knowledge the person has at the end that he did the Aveira, Isnu B'chol HaTorah. Those apply in Kol HaTorah Kula. Shein Adam Mevi Chatos, a person will never bring a carbon Chatos, Elam Kein No Delo Shachat, unless he's aware of the fact that he sinned. So you need to have that Yediyah, and that applies everywhere. Our boy Kamaisa, but those first Yedios Shebetchila, the fact that you were aware in the beginning, Lesnu B'chol HaTorah, that doesn't apply. The idea that you have to have a Yediyah in the beginning doesn't apply everywhere. Meaning to say, Sha'ochel Chaylev B'shogeg. Let's say, for example, you're not talking about Tumah. Let's say we're talking about somebody eats Chaylev, which is non-kosher fat, by mistake. So Afilu Lo Noda Lo Al Chaticha Zu Me'olam Shi Chaylev, even if he never had any knowledge of the fact that this was Chaylev in the beginning. There was no initial knowledge. There was a lapse of awareness from the very beginning. It wasn't even a lapse of awareness. It was a complete lack of knowledge. Uliachar Achila Noda Lo, and then he just finds out after he ate it, Chayev, he's Chayev. This idea that you have to have knowledge in the beginning and then a lapse of awareness and then knowledge at the end, that's unique to Tumah. And so again, in the different versions of the answer, according to the later version, the idea is that something that applies only, that something that applies only over here, that we're counting. That's the first Yediyos. It applies only by Tumah. Those are the ones that we're counting. And then in the first version of the answer of Rapapa, it's the other way around. It's the Basraisa, the later ones, which actually bring the person to bringing the carbon. Those are the ones that we are counting. And the Gemara continues, boy, Rapapa asks the following question, Nelmu mimenu hilchas Tumah mahu. What if the lapse of awareness was in terms of the laws of Tumah? Rashi explains, Nelmu mimenu mimenu hilchas tuma, meaning, kishenaga b'sheretz, when he touched the sheretz, v'yada shenaga b'sheretz, he knew that he touched the sheretz, aval eino yodeya shehu tami, but he didn't know that a sheretz is tami. What if that happened? And so the Gemara continues and clarifies, hey chidami, what exactly is the case? Ilema de lo yada isheretz tami itzvardeya tami. If you're going to say that the person doesn't know whether a sheretz is tami or whether it's svardeya is tami, so that zil kari beirav, with that even the school children know that. You can just read in the Chumash and you'll know the answer to that question. And Rashi explains, Zil kari beiravu tinoko shel beis rabban korin hacholid v'achbar v'atzav. Even the school children know that. They read that in the parsha. Hilkach, therefore, ein zu halama. That's not called. It's something that so many people are aware of. It's not called not knowing. V'yesh kan yediyah b'tchila, and that would be considered a yediyah b'tchila. Meaning, if the person knows that he touched a sheretz, but he's not aware that the sheretz is tamei, even though that's something that everybody else knows, so that actually is considered to be a yediyah b'tchila. Ukesha'achal es hakodesh, and so then now he's tamei, and when he eats the kodesh, nelma mimenu negiya rishon, and now there's a lapse of awareness that he even touched this item, that he even touched this sheretz. So yesh kan yediyah b'tchila v'helam achareh, that would be considered knowledge in the beginning and not knowing in the middle, a lapse of awareness in the middle. When he finds out the end, he's going to be chayiv. In other words, what the Gemara is saying is, if the person is not aware of something that everybody really knows, that it's zil kari beiravu, so that still could be considered an awareness. And again, when it comes to tumah, specifically, you need to have a yediyah b'tchila and a yediyah basof, and that would qualify as a yediyah in the beginning because he was aware of the fact that he touched the sheretz. And so the Gemara continues and clarifies, liolam diyada b'tumas sheretz. So what the question was as follows. Really, the person knows about the fact that a sheretz is tamei. Uchegon denaga b'chadash, and he touched the size of a lentil. V'lo yada kadasha imitami lo mitami. He didn't know if that size, if that amount is mitami or not. That's the part that he was not aware of. And so therefore, at the time that he touched it, he knew he touched it. He just didn't know the halacha of whether he was tamei. So the question is that considered a yediyah b'tchila or not? What's the halacha? Kevan de yada b'demitame sheretz ba'olam yediyahi. Since he knows in general a sheretz causes tumah, that's called a yediyah b'tchila. Oh, Dilmer, maybe kevan de chadasha lo yada, since he doesn't know the halacha about a kadasha, imitame lo, he doesn't know whether that's tamei or not, imitame lo mitame, whether it's mitame or not, so halamahi, so maybe it's like he never knew, and you don't have the yediyah b'tchila. And the Gemara says to that takeaway, the Gemara leaves that as a question. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah asks the following question. Ben Bavel she'ala l'Eretz Yisrael. Somebody's from Bavel, he goes to Eretz Yisrael. V'nala mimenu mokom mikdash. And he doesn't know exactly where the Beis HaMikdash is. So what would be the halacha in that situation? Is that considered to be a yediyah of the mikdash b'tchila? And the Gemara asks, Aliba Deman, well, who are you asking this question according to? Aliba de Rabbi Akiva, if we're following Rabbi Akiva, the boy yediyah b'tchila. Rabbi Akiva is the one that says that you do need a yediyah in the beginning. But holo mechayev al hela mikdash, it happens to be Rabbi Akiva holds that just not knowing about the Beis HaMikdash, that's not enough to be chayiv. You have to have a lapse of awareness in terms of the tumah, not a lapse of awareness in terms of mikdash. And he aliva de Rabbi Yishmael, and if we're talking according to Rabbi Yishmael, the mechayev al hela mikdash, Rabbi Yishmael is the one that says that you're chayiv by a lapse of awareness of mikdash, but halo boy yediyah b'tchila happens to be Rabbi Yishmael, doesn't require any yediyah b'tchila anyhow in order to have to bring that carbon. And so the Gemara instead says, lo no tzrich, it's necessary. The question was being asked in the following scenario. Aliba de Rebbe, we're asking according to Rebbe, de boy yediyah b'tchila, because it happens to be Rebbe says you do need to have knowledge in the beginning. U'mechayev al hela mikdash, and you're chayev if the lapse of awareness was with regards to the mikdash. V'yomar yediyas beis rabo shmo yediyah, and also he says that if it's a yediyah that's something everybody knows, the school children know, that's considered to be a yediyah, that's considered to be knowledge. So that was the question. What's the halach over here? What he doesn't know, the mokom hamikdash, is that still considered a yediyah b'tchila? Kevan de yoda de ika mikdash ba'olam yediyah. On the one hand, we can say, since he knows there is a beis hamikdash somewhere in the world, that's considered that he had knowledge in the beginning. At the time that he became tamei, he had an awareness of the mikdash. O dilmer, maybe kevan de mekom lo yada, maybe we'll say, since he doesn't know its exact place, so halamahi, so it's like he never knew about it. And the Gemara says, the Gemara leaves that as a question. And Rashi explains, O Dilmer maybe kaven to Mekomo lo noda lo meolam, since he never knew the place of the Mikdash, ein kan yediyah b'tchila. Maybe that's not an initial awareness. V'lo dami li yediyah space rabo de tumah. Now that would not be similar to yediyah space rabo, where he doesn't know something that everyone knows, all the school children know by tumah. De'ilu hasam, because over there, lamad shehasheretz metame. He learned that a sheretz is tamei. Ucheshenaga bo yada shenaga b'sheretz. And when he touched the sheretz, he knew that he touched the sheretz. Avalo nizkar lo lahakir Shu Tameh Benegiyazu. It's just that he didn't connect those two things. He didn't remember that, oh, now I'm Tameh because I just touched a sheretz. But everybody knows that you touch a sheretz, you're Tameh, so that's considered Yediyah. So Hasam Kamrin, and there we say, Kevan Shalomad, Shanogea B'Sheretz Tameh, since at some point in school he must have learned that a person touches a sheretz is Tameh, V'zeh Yoda Keshanagan, he knew at the time that he touched that he was touching a sheretz, Ein Zahelim, that's not called a lack of awareness, rather that's considered Yediyah B'Tchila. That's what we would say in normal cases of Yediyah Space Rabbo. The fact that he learned it as a school child, just because he didn't make the connection right now, that's still Yediyah B'Tchila. Avol Zelo Yoda Makom Mikdash Miyama, but over here what we're saying is, it's something that the person never learned at all. He never learned the place of the Beis HaMikdash, so Ein Kan Yediyah Space Rabbo. The point is, maybe over here, we have no Yediyah Space Rabbo at all, and so therefore it's considered a total halam, it's not considered a Yediyah B'Tchila, and again, the Gemara left that as a question. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Echad hanichnas la'azara v'chulu, it said in the Mishnah that whether the person enters the azara tamei or the additions to the azara, and then the Mishnah went through all of the stipulations, what's considered to be a legitimate tosefes, a legitimate addition to the azara. And the Gemara says, Menahani mili, from where do we know this? Rashi says, Menahani mili debo'inan kol hani letosefes azara. How do we know that we need to have this whole procedure, all of these conditions, in order to add on to the azara? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Shimi Bar Chia, Rav Shimi Bar Chia says, the Amar Krotz, because the pasuk says, Kechol asher ani mara oscho es tavnis ha-mishkan, ve'es tavnis kol kelav, the way I'm showing you to make the mishkan and all of the kelim, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tezvav Amud Aleph.